Friedrich Nietzsche famously declared that Christianity was merely Platonism for the people. For Nietzsche, this was a charge of intellectual dumbing down. He argued that the core of Christian doctrine, its belief in a transcendent spiritual God, an objective good in itself, and an immortal soul that devalues the material world, was not a unique revelation, but a popularization of ideas first developed in Plato's Academy. While Nietzsche intended this as an attack, his statement also serves as a remarkably sharp historical lens. He correctly identified that to understand Western thought, one must see Christianity not as a complete break from the past, but as a profound and successful synthesis of pre-existing philosophical concepts. Christianity emerged through a complex process of absorption and adaptation. By examining the confluence of ancient Near Eastern myths, the dominant framework of Greek philosophy, and Christianity's own unique social innovations, we can see how a tradition developed that was far more syncretic and philosophically indebted to Platonism than is often acknowledged. The early Christian communities inherited multiple streams of ancient wisdom. The Church Fathers who shaped Christian theology were often trained in the philosophical schools of their day. They recognized in Platonic thought a language capable of expressing their mystical experiences and theological convictions. The Logos of John's Gospel speaks directly to minds schooled in Stoic and Middle Platonic concepts, while Augustine's Confessions reveals how Neoplatonic spirituality could be transformed into Christian service. To trace this development, we must first look beyond even the Greeks to the older mythological foundations of the Near East, where narrative patterns first arose that would find powerful echoes in the Christian story. These archetypal motifs, divine descent, cosmic sacrifice, redemptive resurrection, had been encoded in human consciousness for millennia before finding their ultimate expression in Christian theology. Before we begin with this exploration of the philosophical influences on Christianity, if you would like to support this channel so I can continue to make videos like this, you can now support me on Patreon for just $5 per month. For now, you will get early access to videos along with other perks. You can also click the join button here on YouTube to become a member here for $5 a month. Or, if you would like to support via one-time payment, there are links to donate via PayPal and Ko-fi in the description and pinned in the comments. The easiest way to support the channel though, as always, is just to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. And leave a comment too. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and it helps with the algorithm. Thank you so much for the support. Now let's begin. Christianity arose from a world already rich with divine narrative. The Israelites and their Phoenician neighbors had emerged from the same Canaanite cultural matrix around 1500 BCE, sharing not just geography, but a deep reservoir of stories, cosmological visions, and theological concepts. Rather than representing foreign influences, these surrounding traditions offer us a window into the very narrative DNA that would later find expression in both Hebrew scripture and Christian theology. The Phoenician priest, Sanchuniathon, preserved one of our most detailed glimpses into this shared mythological consciousness. His ancient history reveals a cosmos born from turbid chaos, populated by a lineage of gods whose struggles and triumphs establish the fundamental patterns of divine action in human affairs. Most significantly, the supreme deity of this pantheon bore the name El, the identical divine name that would resonate through Hebrew scripture as Elohim and El Shaddai. This linguistic continuity points to something deeper than mere borrowing. It reveals a shared theological inheritance. Within this Phoenician cosmology lies perhaps the most startling prefiguration of Christian soteriology. Sanchuniathon records that during a moment of cosmic crisis, the god El offered his only begotten son as a burnt sacrifice to avert universal catastrophe. This divine son bore the name Yehud or Yedud, literally meaning only or beloved, chosen to describe his status as the only begotten son. Here, centuries before the composition of the Christian Gospels, we encounter the archetypal pattern of divine paternal sacrifice that would become central to Christian theology. This was not an isolated motif, but part of a broader spiritual grammar that included divine descent, cosmic sacrifice, and redemptive death. The binding of Isaac in Hebrew scripture represents another variation on this theme, suggesting that the pattern of divine sacrifice had become so deeply embedded in regional consciousness that it manifested across multiple traditions. The treatment of serpent imagery reveals how different communities could draw from the same symbolic wellspring while arriving at radically different theological conclusions. Throughout the ancient Near East, from Egypt to Persia, the serpent carried divine significance as the agathos daimon, the good demon, representing life force, wisdom, and regenerative power. Phoenician culture embraced this veneration. The developing Israelite tradition, however, made a decisive theological break with this widespread understanding. In the Genesis narrative, the serpent becomes the tempter, the adversary of divine order, rather than its embodiment. This transformation signals a conscious theological choice to define Israel's spiritual identity in deliberate contrast to the dominant religious symbolism of their neighbors. This dynamic of inheritance and transformation would prove crucial to understanding how Christianity would later synthesize diverse philosophical and mythological streams while maintaining its own distinctive theological vision. While these ancient mythological currents provided the narrative foundation for Christian consciousness, the intellectual architecture that would give Christianity its systematic theological structure emerged from an entirely different source: the philosophical schools of the Hellenistic world. By the time Christian communities began forming, Greek philosophy had established itself as the dominant mode of sophisticated thinking throughout the Mediterranean world. Platonism had evolved far beyond its origins in Plato's dialogues by the time it encountered early Christianity, where Plato himself, who lived from 428 to 348 BCE, had explored ultimate questions through open-ended conversations with his students. His successors gradually transformed these exploratory discussions into systematic doctrine. Xenocrates, who took over leadership of the academy after Plato's death, began organizing the master's teachings into more definitive philosophical positions, partly as a response to the competing systematic approach of Aristotle's school. The tradition continued to develop and adapt throughout the centuries. During the Middle Platonic period, 90 BCE to 250 CE, philosophers like Antiochus of Ascalon brought new life to Platonic thought by incorporating Stoic ethical concepts, demonstrating the tradition's remarkable capacity for growth and renewal. This philosophical flexibility was important when Christian thinkers began wrestling with how to express their mystical experiences and theological insights in intellectually rigorous terms. By this period, the boundaries between Platonism and Pythagoreanism had become increasingly blurred. Core Pythagorean concepts, particularly the idea that souls could be reborn in new bodies and that mathematical harmony underlies cosmic order, had been absorbed into mainstream Platonic thought. This fusion created a rich intellectual environment deeply concerned with questions that would prove central to Christian theology: the nature of the soul, its divine origins, and its ultimate destiny beyond material existence. These philosophical schools provided more than abstract concepts. They offered a complete framework for understanding the relationship between the visible and invisible worlds, between temporary existence and eternal reality. Such deep thinking about the nature of reality would prove essential when Christian thinkers attempted to explain their understanding of divine incarnation and spiritual transformation. The crucial figure bridging Greek philosophical sophistication with biblical tradition was Philo of Alexandria, who lived from 20 BCE to 50 CE. Living in the cosmopolitan intellectual center of Alexandria, Philo embodied the cultural synthesis that would become characteristic of early Christianity. As a devout Jew trained in Platonic philosophy, he dedicated his scholarly career to demonstrating that Hebrew scripture contained the same eternal truths that Greek philosophers had discovered through reason. Philo's theological innovation lay in his way of systematically explaining the concept of divine mediation. His understanding of God featured a transcendent divine being who remained beyond direct contact with the material world, operating instead through divine intermediaries, the Sophia or wisdom, and the Logos or word or reason. Most significantly for later Christian theology, Philo described the Logos as God's firstborn son, the divine agent through whom the cosmos was created and continues to be governed. This theological architecture provided the conceptual foundation that would later enable Christian thinkers to explain their understanding of Christ's divine nature. When the Gospel of John proclaimed that in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God, it was drawing directly from this established framework that Philo had developed. The philosophical structure for Trinitarian theology already existed, constructed from Platonic materials and refined through Jewish theological reflection, awaiting only its Christian application. The philosophical foundations established by Philo and the mythological currents flowing from the ancient Near East created the intellectual conditions for Christianity's remarkable theological development. As Christian communities grew from scattered house churches into an organized religious movement, their thinkers embarked on one of history's most ambitious intellectual projects: the systematic construction of a coherent theological system that could stand alongside the sophisticated philosophical traditions of the Greco-Roman world. The early Christian apologists faced a practical challenge that required philosophical creativity. The gods of the Greco-Roman pantheon wielded undeniable cultural power and seemed to produce real effects in the lives of their devotees. Rather than dismissing these deities as mere illusions, Christian thinkers like Justin Martyr adopted the Platonic concept of daimons, intermediary spirits operating between the divine and human realms. This philosophical framework allowed Christian theologians to acknowledge the reality of pagan spiritual phenomena while fundamentally reinterpreting their meaning. The traditional gods became reclassified as malevolent daimons, or demons who had deceived humanity into false worship, while beneficial daimons provided a ready-made conceptual template for understanding angels as divine messengers. This theological strategy preserved the explanatory power of Platonic cosmology while establishing Christianity's monotheistic supremacy. One of Orthodox Christianity's most fundamental theological innovations emerged through direct opposition to Platonic cosmology. In Plato's Timaeus, the demiurge crafts the cosmos from pre-existing chaotic matter, working as a divine artisan with available materials. Christian theologians like Irenaeus rejected this model entirely, insisting instead on creatio ex nihilo, creation from absolute nothingness. This doctrine accomplished multiple theological goals simultaneously. It established the absolute sovereignty of the Christian God, who required no prior materials or conditions for creative activity. It also differentiated the benevolent creator from the flawed demiurge figure that had become central to competing Gnostic systems, which often portrayed the material world as the product of an inferior divine craftsman. The question of how an all-good, all-powerful God could permit evil's existence presented perhaps the most serious intellectual challenge to Christian theology. Augustine of Hippo solved this ancient puzzle by adapting a concept from Neoplatonic philosophy, the understanding of evil as privatio boni, a privation or absence of good, rather than a substantial reality in itself. Augustine argued that evil possesses no independent existence. Instead, it represents corruption, woundedness, or absence within the good creation that God intended. Just as darkness exists only in the absence of light, evil manifests as the absence or distortion of divine goodness. This elegant philosophical solution became the standard explanation of evil in Western Christianity for centuries, demonstrating how Platonic concepts could be transformed to serve distinctly Christian theological purposes. Later theologians moved beyond defensive apologetics to create profound syntheses of Platonic and Christian thought. Origen pioneered this work by systematically applying Platonist methods of allegorical interpretation to Scripture, developing influential theories about the pre-existence of souls and universal salvation that pushed Christian theology toward increasingly mystical territory. The Cappadocian Fathers of the 4th century built upon Origen's foundation to articulate a sophisticated mystical theology. Gregory of Nyssa described God as existing in divine darkness, beyond all human concepts, while Athanasius formulated the doctrine of theosis or deification. God became human so that we might become God. These developments reached their culmination in the writings of Pseudo-Dionysius, whose 6th century texts explicitly merged Neoplatonism with Christian theology to create the foundational works of Christian mysticism. Platonic influence extended deep into the practical foundations of Christian life and belief. The 4 cardinal virtues identified by Plato, wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice, were adopted wholesale by Christian thinkers like Ambrose of Milan and Augustine, providing a rational structure for moral life that was later combined with the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Yet this philosophical inheritance also created lasting tensions within Christian thought. Platonism's emphasis on the immortal, immaterial soul as the true self stood in complex relationship to Christianity's insistence on bodily resurrection. Where Greek philosophy often portrayed salvation as the soul's liberation from physical existence, Christianity maintained that salvation remained incomplete without the resurrection of the flesh. This fundamental tension has shaped Christian eschatology from Origen's time to the present. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this philosophical synthesis appears in the technical vocabulary of Christian orthodoxy itself. When the bishops gathered at the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE to define the divinity of Jesus and the Trinity, they reached for the precise terminology of Greek philosophy. The Nicene Creed employs the terms ousia, essence or substance, and hypostasis, individual reality or person, to describe the relationship between Father and Son. The same word, hypostasis, that the Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus had used to describe his 3 divine realities, the one, the intellect, and the soul. While these early church fathers saw the fusion of Platonism and Christianity as a necessary and divinely guided development, this view was not universally shared in later centuries. In fact, this very synthesis would come under sharp attack from Enlightenment thinkers who sought to recover what they believed was a more rational, original form of Christianity. Perhaps the most forceful critic was the American founding father, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson was a vocal critic of what he saw as the corruption of Christianity by Platonism. He believed that the simple moral teachings of Jesus had been obscured and distorted by the philosophical and mystical doctrines of Plato and his later followers. In an 1820 letter to John Adams, he laid out his argument with striking clarity. The Christian priesthood, finding the doctrines of Christ leveled to every understanding and too plain to need explanation, saw in the mysticism of Plato materials with which they might build up an artificial system, which might, from its indistinctness, admit everlasting controversy, give employment for their order, and introduce it to profit, power, and preeminence. For Jefferson, key Christian doctrines that the early church fathers had painstakingly developed, most notably the Trinity, were not original to Jesus, but were Platonic mysticisms and jargon that had been engrafted onto a pure moral philosophy. To reclaim what he considered the genuine precepts of Jesus himself, Jefferson undertook the project of creating his own version of the Gospels, famously known as the Jefferson Bible. Using a razor, he literally cut out all instances of miracles, the resurrection, and other supernatural events he attributed to Platonic corruption. Jefferson's project was, in essence, an attempt to surgically undo the very synthesis that thinkers like Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and the bishops at Nicaea had worked so hard to create. His work stands as a powerful testament to the enduring tension between the philosophical faith constructed in the early centuries and the desire of later generations to find a simpler, more authentic message at its core. The sophisticated theological synthesis achieved by Orthodox Christianity was not the only possible outcome of this encounter between biblical tradition and Greek philosophy. The remarkable diversity of early Christian communities becomes visible through groups like the Carpocratians, whose radical experiment in philosophical Christianity offers a striking alternative vision of what the synthesis might have produced. The Carpocratians embraced the Pythagorean and Platonic doctrine of transmigration of souls, fundamentally altering their understanding of Jesus himself. Rather than viewing him as a unique divine being in the emerging Orthodox sense, they understood him as a super sage who had achieved spiritual perfection through the recollection of his soul's divine knowledge accumulated across multiple lifetimes. This philosophical framework transformed Christianity from a religion of unique divine intervention into a system of spiritual achievement accessible to any sufficiently developed soul. Their religious practices reflected this theological orientation in ways that would have seemed scandalous to many contemporaries. The Carpocratians became the first known Christian group to employ icons in their worship, maintaining painted portraits of Jesus that they venerated alongside images of the great philosophers who had inspired their spiritual understanding, including Plato and Pythagoras themselves. This visual synthesis perfectly embodied their conviction that Jesus belonged within the broader tradition of philosophical wisdom rather than standing apart from it. The social implications of their philosophical Christianity proved equally radical. Epiphanes, one of their key theorists, outlined in his work On Righteousness a stark form of communitarianism that challenged the fundamental structures of Roman society. He advocated for complete communal ownership of property and even suggested that familial relationships should be held in common by the community, representing a direct application of Platonic social theory to Christian practice. The convergence between developing Christian and Platonic traditions extended beyond theological speculation into the realm of ritual practice, revealing shared assumptions about the material world's capacity to mediate divine reality. As Neoplatonism evolved under philosophers like Iamblichus, it developed a sophisticated system of ritual magic known as theurgy, which represented far more than common sorcery. Theurgical practice constituted what we might call respectable magic, high ritual designed to purify the soul and invoke divine assistance through carefully orchestrated ceremonial acts. Theurgists operated from the philosophical conviction that the material world contained divine signs or correspondences called symbola, and that performing specific rites with the correct materials and invocations could respectfully engage these divine powers to achieve spiritual elevation. This philosophical approach to ritual bears striking resemblance to the growing importance of sacramental theology within Christianity. Christian communities increasingly understood their rites, baptism, the Eucharist, and other sacred actions as essential physical means through which divine grace was channeled to believers. Both systems share the foundational conviction that correctly performed sacred ritual served as a vital bridge between the material and divine worlds, transforming ordinary substances and actions into vehicles of transcendent power. The philosophical foundations of Christianity underwent a dramatic transformation during the High Middle Ages through the rediscovery and integration of Aristotelian thought. While Platonism had provided the foundational spiritual and metaphysical vocabulary for the early church, Aristotelian philosophy would eventually supply Christianity with its systematic intellectual framework. This represented more than a simple addition to existing theological resources. It constituted a fundamental reorientation of Christian philosophical method. Where Plato's thought directed attention toward a transcendent realm of eternal forms, Aristotelian philosophy focused on empirical observation, logical analysis, and systematic understanding of the natural world. This philosophical shift found its greatest champion in Thomas Aquinas, whose monumental theological project sought to create a comprehensive and rationally defensible account of Christian faith. The Aristotelian transformation introduced a new intellectual temperament into Christian theology. Augustine's Platonic heritage had produced a dualistic worldview that prioritized the immaterial soul and heavenly reality over what he considered the shadowy material world. The Aristotelian framework, championed by Aquinas, valued the concrete and observable world as the primary site of genuine reality, leading to different theological emphases and methodological approaches. Aquinas and his fellow scholastics put Aristotelian intellectual tools to specific theological purposes. Aristotelian logic provided the methodological foundation for structuring arguments and resolving apparent contradictions in Scripture, creating the basis for rigorous university debate that would characterize the medieval intellectual life. The Aristotelian metaphysical distinction between a thing's essential substance and its perceptible accidents offered theologians a powerful framework for explaining the mystery of transubstantiation in the Eucharist, allowing them to argue that the substance of the bread and wine changes while the accidents remain unchanged. Aquinas also adapted Aristotelian virtue ethics, which focused on achieving human flourishing in temporal existence by integrating it with distinctly Christian spiritual goals. He argued that the natural virtues accessible through reason provided a foundation for the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity, which were necessary for eternal salvation. This Aristotelian integration represented a profound shift in Christian intellectual culture, where Platonic Christianity had encouraged believers to look upward toward transcendent heaven. Aristotelian Christianity provided sophisticated tools for looking outward at the created world and inward at the structure of reason itself, all directed toward better understanding the God who had created both natural order and rational faculty. The intellectual journey we've traced reveals Christianity's remarkable capacity for philosophical synthesis. Rather than simply adopting a single system of thought, Christianity drew from both great pillars of Greek intellectual tradition in successive historical stages. It first constructed its spiritual and metaphysical framework upon the transcendent foundations of Platonism, then later fortified its systematic doctrines with the empirical logic of Aristotelian method. Yet this sophisticated philosophical inheritance raises a compelling historical question. Why did Christianity capture the allegiance of an entire empire while its philosophical sources remained confined to scholarly circles? The answer lies in the revolutionary social architecture that Christianity constructed around its intellectual core. Philosophy, whether Platonic or Aristotelian, demanded extensive education and leisure for serious pursuit. It offered profound metaphysical insights, but provided no relief for material suffering. The philosophical schools attracted brilliant minds and produced sophisticated treatises, but they remained fundamentally elite institutions serving a narrow intellectual class. Christianity succeeded because it created something unprecedented, a philosophical religion with universal accessibility. While its theology could achieve remarkable sophistication in the hands of trained thinkers like Augustine and Aquinas, its core message of divine love and salvation remained comprehensible to everyone from slaves to senators. The Church developed an institutional structure that could simultaneously engage in complex theological debate and provide practical care for society's most vulnerable members. This social mission proved as revolutionary as any philosophical insight. Christian communities established comprehensive social networks that cared for the poor, nursed the sick, supported widows and orphans, and created bonds of fellowship that provided immense strength in the often harsh conditions of Roman society. They offered not just intellectual satisfaction, but material assistance, emotional support, and genuine community belonging. Christianity demonstrated that the highest philosophical insights need not remain the possession of an educated elite, but could be made to serve the transformation of entire societies. In synthesizing the mystical transcendence of Plato with the systematic rigor of Aristotle, then wedding both to an unprecedented commitment to universal human dignity, Christianity created a cultural force that would reshape civilization itself. This remarkable combination explains why Christianity succeeded where its more abstract philosophical rivals could not. It offered not just understanding of ultimate reality, but practical pathways for living within that understanding, supported by communities committed to actualizing divine love in the material world. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think of this synthesis of philosophy and theology. Do you agree, disagree, did I miss anything? As I mentioned in the beginning, if you would like to support the channel, you can now join my Patreon for just $5 per month and get early access to videos. For a one-time donation, there's a Ko-fi and PayPal link in the description and pinned in the comments. But the easiest way to support is just to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a future video. Check out my website, Oculus.com, and the other history channel I narrate for called Folks of Yore. Again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time.